Okay, so we're gonna step outside the SEC, talk about a coach, Ryan Day at Ohio State, and this is kind of just a fun. For instance, they're actually making an announcement tomorrow, which might make this whole thing completely moot by the time I get this thing edited and up on YouTube. But I think it's a fun discussion. You're actually pretty high on Ryan Day, and I think there's a good reason to be that way. I would argue, and you like to disagree with me, but I don't know that you will here. I would argue that if Urban Meyer gets fired tomorrow and Ryan Day's the head coach this season, Ohio State still is the odds-on favorite to win the Big Ten. And are they your favorite to win the Big Ten if there's no Urban Meyer?
I think they still have to be. I mean, they're just so much more talented than anybody else in the conference. I don't see Michigan turning the corner that quickly, and we may have a discussion later why that is. Um, Penn State should be pretty good, but they're you know I do think the loss of Moorhead may be really significant, and it's going to be really interesting to see if Franklin kind of rebounds from that. And then Saquon Barkley is truly exceptional, or was exceptional for that team. Um, and normally losing a running back, no matter how good they are, isn't that big of an impact. But Barkley was so good and such a tool in their offense that I'm not sure that's not going to have a ripple effect. But outside that, do you want to point at somebody like Wisconsin? Because uh, I think anybody that watched Ohio State versus Wisconsin came away from that game extremely frustrated that Ohio State didn't do better. And given what we saw to JT Barrett and the other quarterbacks, we almost feel like they're going to be better off. So I, I don't know. I don't see why anyone should be the favorite. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I think it would be extremely foolish to put anybody else as the favorite in the Big Ten.
And it's interesting because they've got TCU, who I think will be a step down from the home and home they did with Oklahoma. So I don't want to bake in a win for Ohio State there, but they've got TCU. They do have the Rutgers and Maryland baked in wins this year. They don't play Wisconsin in the regular season. They are at Penn State. They're at home with Michigan to end the season. I do think, and I don't. We are going to talk about Shea Patterson in a second, so I don't want to get into whether or not that situation is gonna unfold with Michigan or Ohio State winning. But I, I think it's I want to follow up my question of, you mentioned they're more talented than almost anybody else or anybody else in the Big Ten. So if, let's say, Ryan Day goes 11-1, subsequently 12-1, wins the Big Ten this year, makes the playoffs, how much of that is him, and how much of that is anybody could go on autopilot and win 10 games at Ohio State right now?
I think it's probably 85% the latter, frankly. The position that they're in, and we talked a lot about this in the earlier part of this preview, coaches often win the season from January to August, right? I mean, 60% of your success in the season comes from January to August. If not, and if you include recruiting in that, I'm going to say 80% of your success is January to August. Only probably 20% of your success is week to week game planning, um, play calling, offensive, genius, et cetera, et cetera. Frankly, Nick Saban, I don't think is, in a lot of ways, maybe is that great of a game day coach. I think he has a lot of flaws. I think he's managed quarterbacks wrong at times. Lane Kiffin took a team that was probably not going to be all that great in 2014 and took him to a conference title because he was a really good coordinator. And I think that kind of said where they were normally at in terms of a lot of stuff they did as a program. But why is Nick Saban Nick Saban? It's because of what they do from January to August. And the situation they're in, Day stepping into a football team that's already been organized, developed. They have, Ohio State will have already developed a game plan from every opponent on their schedule. Okay, they usually, coaching staffs that are this well organized spend a week and a half to 2 weeks throughout the whole offseason, and each and every team creating a game plan. And all that stuff's already in place. They're already going to have a really detailed practice schedule. They're going to have all the drills they're going to line up that they're going to run lined up. They're going to have a nutrition schedule, and they're going to have a schedule for how kids are going to be tutored, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all Day really has to do is make minor adjustments as they come up, not screw up, keep the plan in place, and keep it going. And if he does that, they can be successful. So I do think, win or lose, most of his success is going to be established on the back of what essentially came before. And that's true of most interim coaches, with the exception of guys that take over a team that completely quit on the guy before. I mean, if that's not the case, then you're really not doing a whole lot more than driving the train that was already there.
I think another interesting discussion here, if we're going to stay on Ryan Day for a minute, is we had a discussion when this all came out. You and I did, and I thought, like the rest of the country thought, that Greg Schiano was the slam dunk interim head coach. You have a guy that's had a lot of success at Rutgers, had some, not a lot of success, other than pissing everybody off in the NFL. But he's the associate head coach there already. He's the defensive coordinator. I thought slam dunk head coach, interim head coach. Let's see what happens at Ohio State. And you didn't think that was going to be the case, even before they announced Ryan Day, and then they ultimately announced Ryan Day. You didn't think there was a slam dunk. You didn't say, no, it's going to be Ryan Day, but you said, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. I'd love some insight there. Was it because of all of what went down with Tennessee? Is there maybe his history in the NFL? Talk about why you didn't feel in your gut that it was an automatic slam dunk for Schiano when everybody else in the room thought that would be the case.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. One, he had issues at Tampa Bay, where there were some, like allegations whether the players were being treated right, et cetera. And there was drama with Tennessee, but I and this isn't a shock if you're familiar with it. It's the Penn State stuff. It's the fact that he was attached to that scandal. A lot of people accuse him of being aware of what Sandusky was doing, and I think you have to step back a little bit in these situations and understand who exactly is making these decisions as administrators. A lot of times, I think fans sort of have maybe a over optimistic view, or maybe that's not even the right word, but they view administrators and administrations as sort of omniscient machines, and they're really just a collection of people. And they're people that could be your next door neighbor. And in the case of major institutions, those guys are usually out of academia, and they have real concerns about PR issues. They have concerns about reputation and the way things are conducted and the way things appear. But that's, what you see as catering towards the media and PR. Realize the people making the decisions are probably more like those media members, and the way they would view a situation and the way they view outrage. And I'm not just talking about ESPN's media members, but a media member on somebody that gives insight on NBC or Fox News or what have you. Those are the kind of guys that make up high level administrators at a university like Ohio State in general. At least that's kind of their mindset. So to them, what they saw was a little, they didn't see it through a football perspective. And when I'm talking about like the board, the president, they saw it from an academic perspective, and they saw it from what you might view as a media perspective, but is just much more of, again, sort of an academic perspective. And to them, they wanted a guy that was stable. They wanted a guy that knew the program was stable, didn't have black marks, and wouldn't have anything that could be accused of continuing any sort of issues of discipline or personality within the program. So that's what went on there. I mean, the Penn State stuff, obviously everybody kind of knows that was attached to Schiano, but I think the important thing here is really less knowing about Schiano as it is understanding who the decision makers are and the way they think and how they go about doing things.
And I don't really want to get into what we expect or what should happen with Urban Meyer. We've got our own thoughts on that situation. I do want to talk real quick about Ohio State's season this year. With this happening so late in the game, regardless of who comes in, Does that cause disruption in the locker room? I don't think. I mean, their first real game is week 3 against TCU. So they open with Oregon State and Rutgers, and they're both home games. I, I personally don't think it's going to be a big deal. Even if it is a big deal, I don't think Oregon State's good enough. Like, they were terrible last year, just absolutely awful last year. So that's not a challenge to me to worry about, even if you're distracted. But what do you think in terms of this the season as a whole? Whether Meyer comes back or whether Ryan Day is the head coach for the long haul, is it a big enough distraction to have an impact on the season that we're not thinking about? Or are these players sort of like the NFL where they're playing at such a high level and conditioning and practicing it at such a high level that they're not on autopilot, and the calls matter during the game and the schemes matter during the game, but the players themselves are going to come out and perform regardless?
I think that's probably fair. I mean, they'd already gotten into camp and everything. It's going to be a distraction, but when you open at Oregon and Rutgers, that shouldn't be competitive ball games in any way. It lets the guys sort of settle into a rhythm. You sort of build in the fact that okay, we've got a schedule, stick to it, ignore external factors, blah blah blah, all that fun coach speak, and you get into it. Like you said, too, TCU is a real team. I mean, potentially a ranked team this year. That's a team that you're going to have to play to beat, but they're not anywhere near good enough to really should challenge Ohio State. Really, it goes all the way to the Penn State game in Week 5, and I think most people sort of agree that there's sort of three outcomes. Maybe one is Meyer is not retained. One is Meyer is not punished, and two, if Meyer is suspended for part of the season, it's likely to be three, somewhere between 2 and 4 games. I think that's what most people expect. So, the point being that two of the three outcomes have Meyer likely coaching against Penn State, and that all kind of wraps up. So, assuming that he isn't gone the entire season, I don't think it has that much of an impact. If he is gone the entire season, then I do think it continues to be a distraction. And I think it's less of a distraction from all the media circus around it as it is the players signed up to play for Meyer, and they could be pretty disheartened because this guy, the guy that they signed up, the legend of a head coach they signed up to be play for, isn't going to be there not just this year but any year in the future, and that's going to make a lot of players sort of rethink decisions they've made, just being 18 and 19-year-olds the way they are. But outside that outcome, I don't think it's going to be that big of a factor.